As we come toward the end of this week, toward this Shabbat, this second Shabbat since the atrocity that occurred nearly 2 weeks ago, I just want to share some random thoughts that come to my mind. And one is the fact that we're all reeling from what happened. Maybe we're mixed between reeling from what happened and wondering what will happen next. Maybe that's distracting us in two directions. I'd suggest we drive carefully, turn the gas off on the stove, be careful in what we do, because all of us, whether we're thoughtful of it or not, cognizant of it or not, are carrying a lot right now. We're carrying the loss to our people, to our family. We're not such a big family in this world that we can say, well, it doesn't matter, they're so far away, they're so far removed among the millions and millions and millions of us. This is very personal. It could be that if you did your DNA link, you'd find that you're actually related. Do a 23andMe, you might find you're actually related, second cousins, maybe even closer, to people who perished in that pogrom of nearly 2 weeks ago. A pogrom, for anybody who isn't familiar with the word or doesn't know its full meaning, is when a group other than Jews, how lucky are we had a word invented for us, a group other than Jews, another population, attacks us viciously, massacres us. Well, that's exactly the best description of what happened. So there's my first thought, which is let's take care of each other. Jewish custom would say that we should be stopping. We should be mourning. We should be tending to our hearts and our souls and our memories and our thoughts and all the stories that are singing through us right now, that are coursing through our hearts and our minds, that we should be sitting around tables and talking about what happened and what it means to us and what it is to be among the family of the Jewish people in which in 2023 this has recurred. And that might lead us to the next thought, which is, but what can we do about it? Because impotence has never served us. What has served us, especially now in this age, is to realize that we have agency, we have power. One of the things that the United States and its allies did collectively was realize that ISIS a few years ago, I'm sure you remember, was a great threat to humanity, doing despicable things. Despicable, barbaric things to innocent civilians. We saw those videos. You must remember that. And what did the world, I should say the civilized world, certainly in this case the Western world and some allies in other parts of the world do? They said, let's attack it from the ground and from the air, and they did, and it took a very, very long time. We may have forgotten how long it took. But eventually, ISIS was destroyed. It, as an organization, as a terrorist threat, doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that the same ethos won't emerge in the guise of another group, another name, another Islamist jihadist group, but that in itself as a threat was eliminated, which means that those people in those countries and neighboring countries don't have that threat to contend with when they go to sleep at night. Therefore, I think, forget the word I think, it's morally justified and vital that Israel takes care of that enemy, that terrorist group on its border. I don't think there's any question that a government's first obligation is to protect its citizens. So just consider that for a moment. A parent's first obligation always is protect. The government's first obligation is protect, then provide good roads, then provide good education and healthcare and all these things that we rely on and look to government to do. But first and foremost, keep us safe. So I think Israel has that same obligation. We know that to its citizens, and it's going to take care of that, as uncomfortable as it's going to be. There's no question, let's not say if people die in this war on both sides, without question there will be more loss of life. But let's remember from a moral standpoint that not all loss of life is the same. It is on the personal and emotional level to the people who are losing their loved ones. But from a point of view, a standpoint of morality, there are people and there are groups in this world who don't operate on the same moral principles. So to take people and shield your weapons with people isn't the same as to use weapons to destroy weapons and strongholds of weapons and headquarters and terrorists, and therefore to have collateral damage, meaning the lives of civilians. And you might know, and you should take pride in the fact that our government, Israel's government, takes great care to ensure that civilian deaths are minimized. Think about what Israel does that I've not heard of happening anywhere else in the world, which is before it's going to bomb a civilian population, and we know that's going to happen because that's where Hamas houses its weaponry and its people, in schools, in mosques, in apartment buildings. Israel says we're going to serve this community first by dropping flyers, even making what were called sound bombs, alerting the entire community so that everybody knows that something is coming and they need to evacuate. One of the questions you might ask, as I've asked, is why, if we have the Sinai Peninsula, which is Egypt, and it's hardly populated, and we have Egypt, which is a very large country, so much bigger than Israel, why aren't more Palestinians leaving through the Rafah exit, through that border, into Palestine, into temporary refugee camps, whatever's necessary to save life? One of the things we have to remember is that Hamas is a terrorist group that is the child of Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood was founded and did its dirty work in Egypt. So the government of Egypt doesn't want that to recur in its own country. It doesn't want that terrorism to be exported back into Egypt. So they're being self-protective, as are the Jordanians, thinking about their giant population and what would happen on the streets of Amman, on the streets of Jordan, if they were to take in the refugees, take in the people who are displaced from this war. There are people who are going to be displaced. There are lives that are going to be taken in war. And what we have to do, I think, in order to remain human and humane, is shed tears for all the victims, is not relegate ourselves and our compassion only to those people who are our brethren, our Jewish brethren or Christian brethren, or even Muslim brethren in Israel, but to realize that every human being is God's concern. Remember that during the Passover Seder, one of the customs and traditions is that God says, don't forget that these are also my children, those Egyptians who drowned in the sea as they chased after you. One of the readings of why we remove from the cup of wine precious, beautiful, delicious wine and say we're going to diminish it, is to symbolize our reluctance, our difficulty with the fact that God also, and so should we, feel the loss of those ancient Egyptians. We should feel the same this year for Palestinians who have lost their lives and Palestinian civilians who will lose their lives, Israeli soldiers, Israeli civilians who inevitably will lose their lives in this ensuing battle. There are people in our community who are directly involved in this, who have already been directly impacted by the terrorist act and who will be impacted by the war. We have people whose own children are in the IDF and over in Israel. We have a number of families in our community with extended family in Israel. So let's reach out to them and know that their experience of this is unique. As much as we might all be in pain and reading the news with a combination of worry, maybe even despair at times, we have to remember how much closer to home that is for those of our loved ones who have their loved ones in harm's way. May God protect them, keep them safe, bring them home to their families safely, in good health, and soon. And may all of us stay safe and stay together. One final thought in this little message is we have to think about outreach, we at Valley Outreach Synagogue, and think about what it is to reach out to one another, not to assume that everybody's doing okay. To reach out to each other with good information, by the way, as well. If you read an article that tells the story accurately and well, share it. If better than that, like recently I shared with some of you a fantastic article and podcast, 8 pages long. If you think, well, the people that I'm going to send this to probably won't read to the 8th page, and you need to read to the last paragraph of the 8th page, it'll put all that's happening in perspective, then maybe you want to make an investment, which is to write down the outline, the main points of that article, so that you can be fluent in conveying its arguments, its facts, its truth to people in your life. Since I've mentioned an article, I should tell you what the article is called, and I'll do that right now. It's Sam Harris's podcast or article, and I highly recommend every word, every letter of it. It's called The Sin of Moral Equivalence. Give that a read and share that in conversation with those around you. Take good care of yourselves.